Remembering the Richmond Hill explosion that happened 10 years ago tonight. Thanks so much for inviting us in. It is Thursday night, 10 o'clock. Great to be with you. Let us know where you're watching. We'll give you a shout out over the next 10, 15 minutes. Felicia is here. Angela is here. We're getting fired up for the weekend, aren't we, ladies?
Oh, absolutely. Fired up and cuddled up and wrapped up.
Good point. Good point.
Because Angela's already warned us tomorrow is the transitional day of weather.
It is. We're going to have a rain chance thanks to once Hurricane Nicole.
Right.
And we're going to have much colder air thanks to, well, a pretty powerful storm system that's brought a blizzard warning to parts of North Dakota. And I've got some video to show you at 11 that if you're not ready to snow, if you're not ready to see snow, you might want to turn away. But let's get you caught up on Nicole. So earlier today it was still a tropical storm. Just recently has been downgraded to a tropical depression, but you can still see that little spin that's just to the south of Atlanta, Georgia, coming out of the panhandle of Florida. This will continue to move north. The moisture, the outer bands are as far north as the eastern sections of Tennessee, and that's the reason we have a rain chance tomorrow. The cold front associated with that winter storm approaching the western sections of Illinois. Yes, they're still under a blizzard warning at this hour and dealing with a lot of snow. The Veterans Day Parade is back. First time since 2019, of course.
I'm so glad.
Oh, wow. We had the pandemic, and then last year weather was an issue. Really not going to be an issue tomorrow. If you get set up early, I'd take the umbrella just in case, because a couple sprinkles, a stray shower possible through, late morning, early afternoon. But I still thinking once the parade begins at noon, we're going to just be mainly cloudy with temperatures in the range of 55 to 60. Future Track 13 will show the timeline of the rain. You can see it coming in from the south. Again, that was once Nicole across the southeastern part of the state, and we'll stop this midday. Best chance of rain east and southeast of Indianapolis. Cold front starts to swing in late tomorrow afternoon, early evening, and we're going to go from 55 to 60 midday, early afternoon into the 40s by the evening hours, and we'll continue to tumble from there. Still thinking 30s for the weekend for highs, and we've been doing a little more analysis on perhaps another little wedge of moisture approaching the cold air. A
wedge of moisture.
Which could mean more than just a few flurries on Saturday.
Wait a minute, what?
If you're south of Indianapolis. So we're just going to kind of have to wait and see. There's just this.
I have to pick myself up off the desk.
Might be a few bigger flakes.
Really?
South of Indianapolis early Saturday morning, as we still have a little bit of moisture and that cold air kind of colliding. So just stick with us. Not a big snow, but the potential that you could see some bigger flakes southern half of the state. And then they're going to be dealing with lake effect snow north.
You're going to go south this
just to see
Saturday,
the big flakes?
right? To see the flakes, see this wedge?
I go south, I'm going to Florida.
Okay.
South to Florida. Just keep on going. I'm not coming back.
Tammy says, bad Angela mentioning that S word, snow.
I know.
And Renita's saying, no, no, no. Claire's with us tonight. Jim's back in Arizona for the winter.
Hey, Jim.
Rubbing it in, Jim.
And saying, go Bears, Felicia. So apparently a Bears
I
fan.
appreciate that.
So, yeah, so that's good to see. Sharon from Logansport. Teresa's still scolding us for talking about the Colts negatively last night.
Teresa says,
about that. That was yesterday.
I know, Teresa's saying no negative Colts talk tonight.
That was yesterday.
I know. Joyce from Versailles.
Teresa doesn't forget.
Ralph says it's raining there in Alabama tonight. Norm's in Marion tonight. So we got a lot of friends joining us tonight. So it's great to have all of you with us. All right, we do want to turn our attention to our big story that we're going to be focusing in on at 11. Where were you 10 years ago tonight? 10 years ago tonight was that Richmond Hills subdivision explosion where those two people were killed and dozens of homes were leveled, destroyed. It was just chaotic that night, and it was a horrible evening for the South Side neighborhood. And I want to show you some drone video that we took today that gives you an idea of the way that this neighborhood has rebuilt itself. But in the center of your screen there, you see those two vacant lots. The one to the right, that is the home that blew up, and the vacant portion just to the left is the home where Jennifer and Dion Longworth died 10 years ago tonight. Those lots have not been rebuilt, but the other people in that neighborhood on the south side of Indianapolis did like a vigil tonight. They brought out some candles to remember the 2 lives that were lost and the dozens of people that were affected. And so recently we brought in veteran Eyewitness News reporter Rich Van Wyk, who covered Richmond Hills and covered all the trials. And Rich and I talked about this important story in our city's history. And I asked him, just to begin our conversation, what he remembers about the night of that explosion.
The thing we remember most is that it rocked the neighborhood like a bomb. People across the city were trying to find out what happened. I was at home watching television, trying to get my head around just how big this could be, how many people were killed, where the fire was, what's happening. This explosion was so big, people thought that a plane had crashed, that maybe a military plane had accidentally dropped a bomb on the neighborhood. The seismograph that keeps track of the Earth's activity and looks for earthquakes at IU Bloomington actually registered the explosion. One of the witnesses said it sounded ungodly. Another woman said standing in the scene of the crime that occurred out there was like standing in death.
And by the time you got to the scene at Richmond Hill, what was the damage like? How horrific was this?
It was something that I had never seen before, and it's hard to quantify. Pictures didn't do justice to the injustice that occurred in that neighborhood. I think we had to look around and realize that 30 homes destroyed. Some were literally obliterated. They looked like a pile of rubber, that was all. Another 80 homes damaged. Many were knocked right off their foundations. They had roofs peeled off, the side of housing peeled off. The damages totaled eventually some $4.5 million or close to it. You're looking at 200 people that were suddenly homeless, and sadly 2 people who perished.
And I think the coverage early on in the first few weeks was about the couple, Dion and Jennifer Longworth. This was the couple that was living next door, and all the people that were injured, all the homes that were damaged or destroyed, and then certainly the first responders who were the heroes to go in and get all these survivors out.
This was probably one of the most compelling and tragic stories that occurred throughout the whole ordeal. Jennifer and Dion lived next door. The force of the explosion killed Jennifer instantly as she was lying in bed on the 2nd floor. The house collapsed 1 full floor. Where's Dion? Unbeknownst to firefighters, he was trapped inside this debris. They already had their fire lines out to another house. It was too late to move their fire lines. And they could hear Dion's voice. They could see him through a hole in the collapsed damage between the basement and all the other burning debris. They could reach out and hold his hand, but they couldn't save his life. It was a terrible scene in which firefighters who lived to save lives had to be pulled away from the burning house so they wouldn't be injured or killed.
It's such a tragedy to lose these 2 Hoosiers in this blast. And so as the days and weeks then, as you're covering this story, at what point do you realize and do you hear investigators talk about this wasn't an accident, that this was intentional?
Investigators were suspicious from the get-go. And it didn't take them very long to figure out how this fire started. There's something called a pressure relief restrictor regulator type device that goes on the gas line of every home. It's there to lower the gas pressure to prevent explosions, prevent fires. That regulator was missing from the home's plumbing system. Also missing was the shutoff valve for the gas-fired fireplace. Without those 2 devices on the gas line, natural gas could just flood and fill that house to the fact that it had an impact or the effect of hundreds of pounds of dynamite going off.
So now investigators at this point in the case are seeing that this in fact looks to be intentional. What else do you remember as you were covering this big story about what investigators found inside of Monserrate Shirley's house?
They found gasoline or evidence of gasoline that had been poured into the garage around the water heater, theoretically to help set off a fire. They found the remains of a microwave oven, which they believed had been rigged to trigger the fire. Start with a small explosion, lead to an explosion that takes down the house. What was missing was surprising. Personal effects, valuable items, jewelry, big screen TVs, all of them had been removed from the house. In fact, also removed from the house was the cat. The cat was put in a kennel. Later on in this case, the prosecutor accused Monserrate Shirley of caring more about her cat than she did the lives of her neighbors.
Let's go ahead and remind you of the three key people in this big story. You've got Monserrate Shirley, then you have Mark Leonard, and then you have Bob Leonard. Tell our viewers again who these people were and their roles.
We'll start with Mark Leonard. Mark Leonard was the ringleader. He made a career of scamming women who didn't think a lot about themselves. He befriended them, became their lovers, took their money. Bob, his half-brother, rigged the home to catch fire. Homeowner Monserrate Shirley went along with the scheme. She helped set up an alibi. The couple went to a riverboat casino the night of the explosion before it occurred. Shirley put her cat in a kennel for the weekend. Again, the prosecutor accused her of caring more for that cat's life than she did the lives of her neighbors.
So at what point during the investigation do you learn that this is all about trying to collect insurance money?
I think it was very early on. Shirley had money problems. She had 2 mortgages on the house. She owed more than twice as much money on the house than it was worth. The plan was to cash in on a $300,000 insurance policy. The trio's 2 previous attempts to burn the house down, by the way, failed. They had to try a 3rd time.
So eventually prosecutors end up charging these 3. So Monserrate Shirley, Mark Leonard, and Bob Leonard all go on trials. What do you remember about covering it?
The 3, as you mentioned, were charged and tried separately. The evidence, though, was so overwhelming against Mark Leonard that he had almost no defense. His attorney argued that this was, in her words, a stupid and selfish insurance fraud scheme that went horribly wrong. She argued that Leonard never intended for anyone to get hurt. The scores of witnesses testified. There were tears and courage as firefighters and residents testified about the horror of that night and what it did to their homes and their lives. Remarkably, after weeks of testimony, it took only jurors 4 hours to convict Leonard of 45 counts of arson, 2 counts of murder, and other charges. Bob Leonard was convicted of similar charges. They were both sentenced to life for prison without parole. Monserrate Shirley, she struck a plea bargain with prosecutors, testified against the Leonards. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. She's expected to be released in 2036.
And Mark Leonard died while he was in prison, didn't he?
That's right. He passed away while in custody.
And Monserrate Shirley and Bob Leonard still in prison at this point, serving out their terms. So as you look back, Rich, on covering this big Richmond Hill story, 10 years later, what sticks with you? What are your final thoughts?
I think the enormity of what occurred out there is still hard to believe. If this were committed for political or ideological reasons, instead of just pure old-fashioned greed, it probably would have been considered domestic terrorism. I think listening to the people tell their stories and have the courage to tell their stories in court, and every time they sat in court, there was a map showing all the houses and properties in Richmond Hill. They put an X as to where their house was or had been, and slowly the map entirely filled out. But the neighborhood has rebuilt itself over 10 years. Some people decided to rebuild their homes, come back, resume their lives. Others couldn't get out of there fast enough. They were emotionally, financially, physically drained by what happened. There's 3 empty lots in the development right now. Monserrate Shirley's lot is still emptied. Another lot belonging to someone we don't know, just a victim of this. One of the residents I spoke with said, "You never get over anything like this, you just learn to live with it."
And we went back into the neighborhood tonight, and our photographer interviewed one of the residents whose son was 7 at the time, so now he's 17. He's doing a college essay talking about the Richmond Hill explosion and how it's impacted him. And based on the conversation that we had with his mom tonight, it sounds like it's been very troubling for this young man 10 years later and now writing about it in the college essay. So you'll see a little bit more from the neighbors and how they marked tonight's 10-year anniversary in Richmond Hill. That's coming up tonight at 11.
Well, and kids that age, they feel safe at home. They feel safe at school.
Yeah.
So traumatic events like that have a long-standing
For
impact.
sure, for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's brace ourselves for what's to come in terms of weather, right?
Grab the umbrella if you're east and southeast of Indianapolis. A little bit of rain the early half of tomorrow. Veterans Day Parade is back in downtown Indianapolis. Temperatures 55 to 60 middle part of the day.
Right.
And then we start to take that tumble by late afternoon, early evening.
Okay. We had several people that were reacting to the snow.
Oh, yes.
And I wanted to, Michelle says, as long as it's east of French Lick, LOL.
Okay, yeah.
I thought that was good.
It'll be close.
Yeah, there were a couple of other people that mentioned, Cheryl, I loathe the snow. Claire
that's a
says
word.
no S word, no snow word. Yeah, so anyway, a lot of people reacting to the snow. So
Yeah, and we'll have a little more better idea on if that little wedge of moisture is going to be there Saturday morning with the cold air.
Yeah.
It's going to be kind of wrapping around the cold front,
Yeah.
so a little backside moisture. So we'll see.
how you feeling about that wedge of
then
moisture?
It's just gonna blow on out of here, and the 70s will come back, and we'll live happily ever after through December.
In April.
Up to an
April. Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us here at 10 o'clock. We'll see you over in Channel 13 over in about 45 minutes from now. We'll see you then. Good night.